Hello, my name is Kris Nelson. My site is evolveconsciousness.org, and this is another episode of the Great Work Launchpad, Ep.4, with the title Barriers to Initiation, Facing the Mirror, Shadow Work, aka Shadow Work, and that is the same name as episode 3. So this is part 2, continuing this breakdown and diving into the shadow, the self, the dark side, the inner, getting to know yourself, facing the mirror, a thing that most people don't want to do, and the barriers to initiation. Oh, we got an early bird here. All right, let's pop that in. And there we go. We got Derek. Oh, and we got another one. We got Brandon coming up. Where's this box?
Yes, gentlemen, Kris. Always a
How's it
pleasure
going?
and honor. Brandon as well. Legends. How y'all doing?
All right, you.
Great. Yeah. I was intrigued with just like facing the mirror. I love that title and I love what it sparked to mind and stuff. I'm not gonna delve into it right away, of course, Brandon, how you doing, man?
Howdy.
So I have a bit of a curriculum. The last episode
Ooh, cool.
we did so self-respect. We can finish off on that if anyone has anything to add, and then next will be we're gonna do self-love slash self-loathing. So related to that is apathy and care for true, and I put M1, M2 because that's how I broke it down. That whole morality presentation was about caring enough to engage in that M2 level of morality, that higher morality. So yeah. So those, and if we finish that, we can go for another one. Oh, we got someone else. All right, we're maxed out at the amount of people. I don't know
Oh,
if anyone else
already.
is coming, but they're not going to be able to join. I'll have to start using. We got Sara in the house. Hey, Sara.
Yes. What's up?
Yeah, it was the first time I kept forgetting to mention it in the OGWN Gilded, and I
Oh
did
yeah.
last night.
Or get
So
that cross-talk chat on Telegram.
yeah,
Yeah,
technically, I think there's room for one more, and
yeah.
then that'll be
Hopefully,
maxed
yeah,
out. I'll have to make another box and make some room in my overlay here.
yeah, for
But
sure. Kris, do you mind if
yes,
I segue into what you're saying, and it would
yeah,
refresh what Sarah could also tag onto that in regards to? Yeah, I wish I was on your last show. I'm working 7 days a week, so it's kind of hard on these late nights these days. But I'm glad I'm in the house and up and at 'em. And thinking about the whole self-respect stuff in regards to also facing the mirror and just obviously you guys went over the etymology of what respect means, to look back again and to look back again at yourself and all these things, and just to look back at all the things that you don't like about yourself and are uncomfortable with looking at and stuff, to like really try to like, not like Clockwork Orange eyes, but you know what I mean? Like just like really try to examine it, even objectively, try to have that open heart and stuff. Cause like, I'm not the biggest fan of the term like unconditional love, but I mean, ah, I don't want to say like you could apply it to yourself at least, type of thing, like, um, but it's, I see it as like getting more comfortable with the uncomfortable aspects of yourself is going to help kind of like dissolve that and make you become more whole, like holistic in a sense, and you're integrating more of yourself and kind of like weeding out the kinks and inconsistencies in a sense of your I wouldn't say persona because that's like person, mask, whatever, right? The etymology of that, but just like your being, your attributes, your proper personality, maybe, if you will, but your characteristics, right? And who you have been and who you can evolve to be. But yeah, Sarah, I'm glad you came through. Revolution Radio in the house. I love saying that video.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, Derek. I don't know what the topic is for today, but I'm happy to make an offering of my thoughts about it. And if it gets too crowded and other people want to jump in, I can always jump out. Not a problem.
Yeah,
I doubt that
yeah,
there's
me
going to be
too,
any
man.
overcrowding issue. Don't worry about that.
I'll be a sacrificial person as well because I've been on the panel, in the past as well. So yeah, I this is about encouraging others to be up in here for sure, right? Get some skin up in that game.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to try their hand at discussing a topic, anyone can come and join and break the ice and wet their toes and try to get more familiar with talking online or having their face on a camera or on a stream. Then they can jump on and try to express themselves and their thoughts on the subject. So as I was saying, it's the what is the topic? Oh yeah, the barriers to initiation, facing the mirror, the shadow work. Last week was pretty much stayed around self-respect, things related to that, and we can top off on anything related to self-respect at the beginning here, and then we'll continue with the next part of the little itinerary I created. So I put in the YouTube chat self-love, self-loathing, apathy, care for truth, and when you love yourself enough, that level 1 morality where you don't support or participate in immorality, and the level 2, the higher level of morality of engaging in that work to teach other people about morality and trying to influence them to do the same, to stop participating in it, supporting it, and as well engage in the teaching effort. I'll retouch on self-respect just for a minute here. So we talked about objective detachment last week, and one thing that I wanted to mention to summarize that not summarize, but add an additional point for the ego attachment, the things we get attached to and we associate with our identities. Especially, it can impact one's effort to begin or persist and the determination to continue in the great work. And that is the attachment to money or fame or attention. People can think that, oh yeah, okay, I'll create content and maybe with YouTube monetization, or that they'll get famous like other people, or they'll get attention and people will pay more attention to them and talk to them or something, or write comments, and they'll have more interaction, and then they might start making content, but then there's no money involved, and so if there's no money involved for them, it's just a waste of time because they could be doing other things with their time that they're more interested in because this isn't enough of a priority in their life. Or they want attention from others, so when they make content, they're expecting, that attention back. They're putting out information, they're expecting attention back, but they're not getting any attention. Maybe it could be people aren't watching, or they're not getting comments of encouragement or whatever, so then they lose interest in doing it because they're like, oh, well, it's not affecting anyone. There's no one paying attention, so there's no point in doing it. And so then they just stop. So that's things that people are attached to rather than just doing it for that care for truth and the sake of truth. Don't do it necessarily for yourself alone or for others alone, but when you're doing that service to truth instead, which is what the whole great work is about, getting into that level of care for truth and self-love, you end up one of the motivations is you want to do it for yourself. When you're serving the truth, you're doing it for you and you're doing it for others at the same time. When you're serving the truth, but if you're serving other people, well, it doesn't mean you're going to necessarily be serving the truth or yourself. And if you're just serving yourself, well, then usually you're probably not doing anything to benefit other people or the truth. So that target is to aim for a service to truth, and then, it applies to yourself and others at the same time. It's the best position to aim for.
I'll jump in. Great points. Dealing with some stupid. Well, side note, I hate updating Windows. I just hate it. They make stuff so complex. Wish it was simpler, but on that side note, yeah. Barriers to initiation. Wrote down a few things of what Kris was saying. Another thing that Kris kind of mentioned here last week, just you know, this idea of bringing something new to the table. I call it the attachment to newness, or the attachment to what's trendy, or the attachment to what's hell appealing to how the masses are what's new. And people haven't realized this. We have to keep repeating and repeating and repeating and repeating the same message that isn't really anything new. So this whole idea of what Kris was talking about, you're going to come in and get this big following, get all the support, you have this false sense of expectations, because you're applying the same pretty much framework that most other creators do who create garbage, and thinking you're going to get have the same reward in doing this kind of work. And unfortunately, that's just not the way things are. But to get to the barriers of initiation, um, fear, fear, which we kind of talked about last week. Um, Fear was always one of my biggest you know things that help me back. And I know we all have our own frameworks of fear that is just stuck in our head, but it's those barriers, that construct, which held me back from jumping in, way before, how I did. But those same barriers, that's fear, that fears though you're going to lose something, or, lose friends, or, lose a connection with the family, or a loved one, or, whatever it is. You've got to let that, like, you've got to let it go. You really have to let it go, and to just like give yourself up to what people would say like a true higher cause, which is doing this kind of work, doing the right thing, trying to step into this teacher of objective morality and truth, and just let go of all this stuff as much as you can. Not saying that fear may still not be there, but you just you recognize it and you learn to deal with it. Because I still get fearful each time I come on camera. I still get a little bit fearful, and I deal with it. I don't let it hold me back. I recognize it, and each time I come on camera more and more, that's me chipping away at those inconsistencies that I have within myself. And that's why I want to keep doing this kind of work, because I'm still doing my own individual work and trying to heal myself. And the more I come on here and talk to other individuals like ourselves, I'm chipping away at my fear. So we can't let that fear constantly hold us back, because that's that unconscious, it's almost like a unconscious health attachment that we really have, because each time we try to go, there's that roadblock, and then we stop, and fear is that roadblock, fear is that barrier. And we really have to start to slowly chip away and work with it, realize it, and that's the main thing, is just recognizing it. Most people aren't even aware of what that fear is. And at the end of the day, I had to tell myself it was just in my head. It was it was just in my big ass head. That's really all it was. In this big ass dome. And it was a lot of fear. But you just had to let that shit go. And when you do, like it was such a huge, relief. It was like a huge like rock being, lifted off, my back because, it was stepping into, a more correct way of being, a more correct way of living, a more correct way of harmonization. So yeah, and mine was, I always hated talking in front of people. Always. Like I say, I'm not a people person. Definitely not. Anyone who knows me know I do not like being around people. I ain't that motherfucker who's gonna go on stage. I ain't that motherfucker who's gonna be in a group. I like being by myself. That's just me, man. But I've always had, speech problems. Have always dealt with that. Have always recognized it, and it is what it is. I don't run away from it, and actually, I think it brings a more authenticity. When we can come on here and talk about our own individual struggles and barriers that, held us back so that other people can learn and recognize, because we all have those struggles. Yeah, I'm not perfect, hell, no one is, but hopefully people can, realize like, hey, so and so, he'll had this barrier and they was over, and, how they was able to overcome it, then that can inspire them to hopefully do the same.
Yeah, we'll talk more about fear, like in depth, when we get to that
Sorry,
one in a few
did I
weeks.
jump ahead?
Yeah, yeah, but it's all good.
So
You
sorry.
can express stuff related to the overcoming the barriers to initiation, to starting the work, and all that healing part. It's all good. But we'll talk about it more in your experience and all the various fears that we've had. I'll for sure fill up one hour episode, maybe two. We'll have a lot to say about that. But the reason I put self love and self loathing after self respect was because of how intricately they are connected. Um, because when you engage in that process of self respect and you do that introspection and that reflection, um, like Derek mentioned, we're trying to integrate and become more whole. So we're trying to heal parts of ourselves, that darkness within that could be the evil that we're partaking in, that immorality, and those demons and the monsters, and all the symbolism and the mythology around that of slaying the dragon and the hero's journey. So that's what that's all about. And Ma'at in the underworld. All of this stuff is about conquering those demons and the darkness within. And part of that process is developing that self-love in contrast to how you formerly were in more of a capacity of self-loathing. And I went into this a bit here and there in my presentation on in Funnel this year for Inspiring Care to Action. Well, anyways, that's what I call it. I know it's called Humanity Rising, but I just call it Inspiring Care to Action because that's what I focused on. But yeah, that aspect of, until you're doing that higher level morality of the great work of engaging in that work to end evil, as I refer to it. One is when you stop participating in evil, you're engaging in that work to end evil. But if you're not putting more energy and effort into trying to end evil, because just you stopping it yourself isn't going to stop it. We have to influence others to stop it as well. And then they have to influence others and it has to keep snowballing. And that's why it's the higher morality and it's the greater burden, because you just doing something for you, that's easier in a sense because it's just you and you have control over you. You don't have control over other people, and influencing others and putting in the time to learn everything and then teaching it. That's a lot harder. And that's why people, as Passio's joked many times, they're like, oh, you want me to do this? Oh, this is what the great work is? Okay, see ya. And then they run in that direction because they're not interested in putting in that time or the attention and the care. And that's where that self-love comes in, because people are still too much, it's still in that capacity of self-loathing. They're still in that unawakened state. They haven't awakened to a higher level enough, those rings of care and compassion, as I presented in Funnel 4, so that they might have, awakened to the, whatever was COVID or before that, 9/11 or things, people doing evil things in the world. And then, they can maybe start to have done that self-respect inner work. But they haven't reached that point where they're motivated enough and that they care enough to have that larger fire ignited within them that fuels them into the great work, which is more effort, and it's a lot harder to do, and it requires more persistence and dedication and determination. So that's why I went into this after self-respect, because I viewed them as one leads to the other. When you engage in that true self-respect and you do that inner work, you're going to develop more of that self-love, and you're going to reduce that self-loathing. So that's related to apathy and care for truth. So if anyone wants to discuss more about that, I could discuss more, but I'll leave other people the opportunity.
Sarah, I'll let you go.
Yeah, I could speak a little bit to that. Well, I think all of that really kind of goes hand in hand with what Brandon was talking about with the pull that fear does to people, the fear-based response in actually doing anything. So I tend to talk to people who they will express their concerns to me, and they want to care about what's happening, but I think a lot of the thing is it is all a fear-based response as to why people don't. And I think that comes from, societal trauma to that. It comes from not just the external world, but it comes from the internal world, their internal environments as well. So I think all of it is actually really connected with that as to why people don't step up, or they turn around and they walk away and they don't want to engage, is because, there's the fear aspect of not wanting to cause any waves, or rejection from other people. And then there's, of course, the population of people who just don't want to put in that time. And they really are, they're just not interested in putting in the time. They think it's not going to be worth the effort. So I kind of feel like, with people doing this, with people doing this type of work, I feel like people should look at it as less of, a career choice where I'm going to get a lot of monetary gain. I can make it a job. And I think that's this, more of this modern day idea that they can use this as like a career instead of just getting a day job. Sorry, that's a truck going by. And they should maybe look at this work as more of something that is a pay it forward kind of work. And, instead of trying to monetize everything, which I don't tend to monetize, I don't see what's the point. I just don't even care about learning how to do that. Like, it's just not in my priorities. I look at it more like it really is just a volunteer position, and I either come correct or I don't. I do the work or I don't. And it's about me coming and having personal responsibility. When I do it, I look at it as, okay, this may not affect me now. It may not change my environment. It may not help anybody in the immediate future. but the offering is now there. And I refer back to history often, where we learn a lot of the lessons we learn now. And a lot of the stuff, even many of us talk about, we're parroting from our past. We're parroting from people we learned sometimes hundreds of thousands of years ago. And I think that is where it comes, like, I kind of think I feel like that's where the pattern is with human beings, at least on this planet, is that we tend to be very delayed with our reactions to things and like how we pick things up. That's how I kind of feel about it. And I feel like all the things that we do today, I feel like the books we write, the podcasts we do, the radio shows, this is going to echo into the future. And like 100 years from now or 1,000 years from now, whatever it is, some kid is going to find all of this on some old computer system or whatever that is obsolete in the future. And they're going to, reverse engineer it and like put it into like a format that they use in 1,000 years. And they're going to find this kind of work. So that's, I kind of see it in more of that larger picture. And even though I would really love it if things just changed now, that would be awesome. I tend to look back in history at the patterns that human beings tend to take. And this is a pattern that I have recognized when researching history. So I don't know if that helps, but that's, I guess, what I would say about it. And just to fight through whatever, fear people have and just be brave anyway. Go for it. I mean, what's the worst that can happen, really? So that's what I would say. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Passio says, it's a testament. That's what we're doing. We're putting the testament into the universe, to truth, and just putting it out there. Not have any expectations that it's going to change the world or anything. But yeah, that's what we're doing it for. That's the goal. We have a goal. That's what motivates our actions, as there's a goal to attain. There's an end. Not that we're going to actually be able to do it, but if no one puts in the time and the energy and the dedication to persist in doing it, well, then obviously the goal will never happen. It's not going to happen on its own. So we're working for that goal, but yeah, we're just putting it out for that goal. But it's like ultimately, just a testament. We're putting it out there so that more people can come across it, and we've done our part to echo it.
Yeah, definitely. And there's nothing really wrong with, echoing sentiments that have already been stated. Like the folks that we've learned, even Manly P. Hall, who did he learn his all information from? He didn't just, come out of thin air. Of course, he had his meditations and that kind of stuff. But at the same time, like, we can all trace back the gnosis, throughout the eons, right? And so those are, and I love this, series that you have unraveling, Kris. It's a stepwise process, and you're laying it out for folks to follow and take heed to and observe and integrate, right? All these things need to be done on so many levels within someone's life. Just, dealing with mundane things, right? Just being more on top of your daily shit, if you will, streetwise spirituality, man. Shit, like, get the fundamentals down. Make sure that you have like your house in order so that you can, build something outside of that, right? And yeah, you're talking about stumbling blocks and facing the mirror and stuff. And quick story of mine of just, I remember, my peers were getting into music, rapping, freestyling and stuff. I was on the edge of the cipher, just beatboxing most of the time because, for the longest time, I really did not like my voice. I remember I was like traumatized when I heard it on like, one of those old school recorder cams, their dad was so happy to play something. I was just like at some fair, like, oh, we got to play this for granddad and this and that. And I just listened to my voice. I was like, I just sound like some weak ass boy, man. Like, why my voice sounds so differently in my head than what I just heard right there. Like, so it took a long time to just it, get over the stiflage of my confidence in myself just based on my voice. Think about the throat chakra, right? And the feelings of within your heart. So the heart is kind of blocking those upper chakras, right? So I couldn't really speak, from a place of true authenticity, if you will, with, that proper, confident step, I guess, if you will. So yeah, that, going through high school, just forget about it. Forget about doing any kind of great work. I mean, holy shit, man. But yeah, after I had some kind of heart explosive awakening, that just opened up the floodgates, and I found my voice again, and I found uh, some kind of stellar confidence because I really, you know, recovered, fragments of my soul and just like proper love for myself because I could actually like see myself, and there's like some kind of veil lifted from my eyelids where I can actually see myself clearer in that mirror that we're talking about that we all need to face. That was kind of like my Saturn's return, if you will. I was like 29 years old, had quite a dark night of the soul and stuff, and and yeah, it just threw me on the trajectory of wow, people all around the world need to like experience, something that I had, this type of like crazy frequency shift awakening and stuff. So yeah, I didn't have any kind of grammar. I just recovered my voice, right? But I was lacking grammar and just the repetition, like Brandon was talking about. It's like we're up in here, and I love this stuff as well because I'm still getting better. We're all getting better. It's we're always fine tuning these things, right? And just getting those reps in like you would in any kind of bodybuilder. You're at a gym, or doing yoga, you're doing any kind of sport, any kind of musical instrument. You need repetition for that to really sink in and integrate into your muscle mind memory reflex type of thing. So yeah, those are just things that people can do on their own as well. And even for myself, I did like over 100 recordings that never saw YouTube or anything, but it was just something that I did, and I was happy to do it. And I was, you get the nervousness stuff, and you're kind of stuttering sometimes, or you're throwing too many ums in there, or whatever, right? So yeah, looking back on it, it's it's just interesting to revisit these things and try to encourage others of like, hey, like there are starting blocks for everyone, right? So yeah, that's all I got for this bit. Thank you.
All right, let's see. Got some notes here. Self-respect and self-love. Talked about this a lot last week, but one of the things that came to mind is, when you're dealing with self-respect and self-love, ultimately what we are doing is using our voice to say no. Like that's what this whole, you know, thing, is about. And like Kris, talked about in his the Law of Freedom Part 5, will, in order to stop will, requires will. And that's what we are using, by using, your voice. You are using the most powerful words to speak, to say no, to say, hey, you crossed this line. And that's what we are, ultimately trying to do. So it is a ultimate sign of self-respect and self-love, you know, by using your voice to say no, because you you recognize, you understand the importance, that you have. And what more, like what greater self-respect, could you possibly, help display, because that's what, like that's really what a lot of people don't use is not using their voice, their silence, and that's why they're still spectating, they're just still watching, and that's really what we want to get people out of. And when you start to go through this process, always consider it like a form of filtration, like a form of purging. This was something that I had went through. um when I started to develop that, self-love, and it took a while, and that self-respect, anything that like wasn't tailored toward that, I filtered it out of my life. I got it out of my life. Um, that was just me. It was a purging because I recognized, where I wanted, how to get to, and anything that, like wasn't, in line with that, anything that wasn't, harmonized with that, I just had to get rid of it. So, and learning, how to use that voice was, one of the biggest things, because without that voice, those who have been silenced throughout history, it is such a dehumanizing experience, like not being able to speak. And that's sadly, what we still see so many people doing is, they may dive into the knowledge, but to actually start using your voice, to dive into that, truly level, M2 that Kris talks about, into truly fighting and trying to stop and actively engage in stopping evil, you know, with the more education, aspect, not getting into, the other parts if you're familiar with this work, but the more education, part, and that right there is, what we are doing to use our voice as a form of self-respect. Because how can you truly care for yourself if you stay silent, if you stay, quiet, and not just silent to, what's happening to you, but what's happened to all of your fellow brothers and sisters, so learning to use that voice, because like that's really what we are like all talking about here, you know, learning to use one of the most greatest gifts, hell, the voice, to speak into existence, to consciously create correctly and not stand silent, you know, because to not use your voice is to pretty much not stand up. And to sit down just means you don't have any power. And when you're powerless, hey, we all know what happens.
Yeah. Speaking of which, Kris, do you mind if I interrupt you real quick? Going back to the last Sunday's chat, law correspondence. That inner voice is going to be a reflection of what you're speaking. In the exterior domain. So there's things to consider with that, within oneself, and in observation with others as well. So things to consider. Keep it hermetically sealed, right? But yeah, second hermetically sealed principle. Great points, Brandon, by the way. Appreciate it.
Yeah, with what Brandon said, the no. You say in my morality presentation on Natural Law, the Science of Morality, Part 4. That's when I had the two pillars of enlightenment, as Passio refers to them. So the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine. Well, the sacred feminine is, ultimately it's saying no to evil yourself, the non-aggression principle. That's where you say no to evil. And the sacred masculine, the self-defense, or just defense principle, defending others, not just about yourself, but others too. That one can just be summarized as saying no with teeth, as Passio refers to it. It's taking it to the physical level, no at the physical level, and the other one is no internally. Obviously, like you mentioned, correspondence, mentalism. Externally, you say no. You have to say no internally first, and then your behavior follows. And then the sacred masculine is, well, no, you're saying no with teeth, and you're putting your actions behind that no. It's not just a verbal no. there's more to it than that. And another thing was, people mentioning people who've had their voices silenced and how dehumanizing it is. And we could talk more about this in the following weeks. It's at the bottom of my list of my guide list or whatever, my topic list, related to the tree of evil and parental abandonment. So when you think of that being silenced as a child, and if a parent does that, it's like a form of parental abandonment, and it creates, can lead to self-loathing. And that's one of the aspects of that tree of evil, and that's why I want to talk about it, because we're talking about self-loathing right now. So the voice is so important, and to having your voice heard. And if someone, as a child, as an adult, whatever, we were supposed to be more tough and stuff, but as a child, you need to have your voice heard, and your parents respect you and hear what you want to say. So if they dismiss you or tell you to be quiet or shut up or stop asking questions, or there could be so many things, a parent being disregarding that voice. You could look at it, that sacredness coming from within and trying to express themselves, and you're supposed to encourage them. And that's just something I wanted to bring up, and how that can create trauma, and then children internalize it, and it creates self-loathing that they're not good enough or not smart enough or not worthy. And then that just proceeds further into their life as they grow up, and it's something that's unresolved, these traumas that are unresolved, and then it manifests as certain behaviors or modalities of thought or ways of living their lives that are not optimal or not conducive to living as a better self. And if anyone wanted to touch up on that, I just wanted to elaborate on that. It's a good thing related to self-loathing, and how it's can lead to even immoral behaviors, where people internalize that, and then I'm not good enough. Maybe why bother even trying to be good since I'm not good enough? And they don't even realize this is all ingrained in their subconscious and unconscious from their childhood, and they don't even realize that this memory they've forgotten is motivating them in their lives, in their future.
Yeah, one of the things that I've heard is, who's going to listen to me, or who am I to start speaking out on these, like deeper issues. And that right there in and of itself, like what Kris, was, talking about, is that right there, stems far, far back to, some, like earlier, possibly abandonment, experience. Because for a grown person to say that stuff, still to me, appears to be like in a childlike, state, because they were, powerless. Maybe they was in a situation, and they wanted to do something about it, and how they couldn't. So how they couldn't cope with it or whatever. Some form of traumatic experience. But to say, who am I to start speaking out on these issues? It's like, man, like, where is the value? Where's the self-worth? Because if you think it is of any importance, then you have the power to start speaking out about it. That's why you have a voice. you know it's not like we have a voice, to only speak about, certain things. Or no, you can speak about whatever you want, like, take your pick. So that right there is more than enough for you to, have recognized that. But yeah, some form of early traumatic experience. And when Pasio talked about parental abandonment, I didn't really quite understand it, but now I do, because man, that is one of the deeper rooted issues that lies in humanity's dark, unconscious, because we all suffer from some form of parental, abandonment, rather it be physical. A lot of us suffer from it emotionally, and how psychologically, but definitely, how spiritually. But how that right there has infested, its way to where that's the norm now, and to where this cycle just constantly keeps repeating, and it's not really being broken. And that's what we have to do, is by developing the self-respect and self-love. That's what helps you start to recognize this cycle. Then once you recognize something, then you can shed light on it, then start to become aware of it, then gain knowledge of it, then possibly put yourself in a situation where you can change or break that cycle. Then therefore, you start to develop that self-love, that self-respect, that self-care, those things that take time, those things that should be instilled at a young age. Therefore, you can do it correct the first time, and not, redo, do it correct the first time. And therefore, this whole experience will be, so much more greater. And um, just kind of summing up what me and Kris have talked about the past couple of weeks, as Kris did go over this about, teaching kids, the correct way the first time. But yeah, I'll just end it at that before I go on another tangent.
I just wanted to chime in there really quick because that's a good point to make. And I think too, if people would observe this, as like a large issue, I think there is also the issue of the social convention, really, of training people to think that anything that is where you're the word where you're going against the grain, and it's contradictory, and it's just like
Controversial?
again,
Controversial.
Sorry.
controversial, or just confrontational is what I mean. Sorry. Where there's a social convention that is going around, I've noticed, at least in the last 10, 15 years, that people being confrontational is being seen as this bad thing. And because they're being trained to think this way, that means they're also not going to question themselves, because they don't want to deal with that confrontation within themselves that's going to enact any kind of questioning or self-care, or even the need to have self-respect, which you have to have self-love for. And what you guys are talking about with parental abandonment, I would actually extend that to steward abandonment, for those who never even got a chance to have like a set of parents, or the one parent or whatever in their lives. And that's something that I talk about quite a lot, excuse me, with, children who are just placed in the care of, institutions or organizations where they're just thrown into the ocean of non-existent, like these are people, this is a whole population of people that's out, part of our human population, that are basically considered as non-human. And these are not people who are ever given any of the tool sets for that. So and I think it all is part of the bigger problem too. And I think that, again, this is, I think, work we do for the future, to teach everybody across the board about, with the topic of self-respect. You've got to have that first within yourself. And, sometimes we don't always have the stewards that we require to teach us those tools. And it's up to us to really, as an individual, to search for those tools. And I don't know if that makes any sense what I just said, but I think like this is something that I talk quite a lot, because there's a lot of this that goes on as with, chronic children who are born and like immediately hospitalized because of their conditions. And this is a large problem in that, even just that community alone. It's a big problem in kids who are thrown into the foster care system. The tools just aren't there. And the so-called psychologists or therapists or council stewards or whatever they are, the programs that are designed to supposedly give these children the best possible jumping off point, they're not doing that job. And that, of course, I do think is by design. But yeah, I think it does all start inwardly with the individual. And yes, it would be ideal if we had the parental backing to help us build those tools. But sometimes we need to step out of that and be like, I didn't have anything that helped me to discover these things, and I need to just take it for my own and just go with it, and then step past the fear of being afraid of everything, of being afraid of confrontation with yourself and with the outside world. And I think that's important. I think that would be an important aspect of that.
Yeah, I've talked about that in my earlier work in, I guess, 11 years ago in my article, Truth is Love, that, speaking hard truths or uncomfortable truths or confrontational truths, well, that is an act of love when you're serving the truth, and people don't want to hear it because a lot of people think, you got to be nice and kind, so you can't say certain things. You got to placate people. You have to walk on eggshells. You have to keep the peace. Don't make waves. You don't want to be hassled. Don't rock the boat. And you got to sugarcoat things. So yeah, there's this whole I don't know how to characterize it in an overarching way, but yeah, the avoidance of confrontation because it's uncomfortable, and that goes back into fear that I've talked about too, where we fear things that are uncomfortable, because when you have confrontations, it's psychologically a negative space to engage in. So your heart pumps more, so there's all those the neurochemicals and everything. Your heart pumps more, and then you feel hot and flustered, and then your head and your ears get hot and everything, and it's uncomfortable. Whether you're on the if you're not as psychologically developed and you're on the receiving end, and people get I mentioned, I think the last episode, being insulted or offended, feeling judged. But when you're confronting someone and they're not taking it well, and it's like something important, and you're in this conflict, well, you're going to feel it yourself. You're going to have these emotional cues, and it's going to result in physiological changes in your body, and it's not going to feel well. So these things, people want to avoid these confrontations because that's not a position of well-being. Your inner state and your physiological state is not in a state of well-being. So it's more of and a contrast to that is like illness, or instead of in a state of ease, it's a dis-ease, not a literal disease, but it's a dis-ease. And instead of being in a comfortable state, you're in a discomfort. And that relates to fear, because people want to avoid things. And the way I've talked about in my earlier work was related to the unknown and things we don't know about, and ignorance, and rejecting truth, and avoiding truth, and in denial of truth. Because, when you're engaging in this truth process, truth can be a destructive act. And that's what apophysis is as well. When we say no, well, it's also apophysis in terms of truth from falsity, or order out of chaos. And I've gone into that in my presentation on morality, that this destructive process, and like an alchemical divorce, you have to shatter the falsity that you're attached to. And that means that your ego, personality, identity construct, your self-view, and your worldview, especially if you're talking things external to the self, well, your self is going to be identified with some of those things. And that's where the ego defenses come in, because when truth is spoken to, people can engage in cognitive dissonance because they don't want to hear it, because part of themselves, the way they've constructed their identity, is attached to that thing that they perceive as being attacked, and it's going to be destroyed. And if that happens, then it's like the phoenix, where you burn things and get rebuilt, but they don't want to go through that process, because destroying themselves and having to rebuild themselves, well, that's an insecure state. They'd rather just hold on to the state of themselves as they view themselves, or how they view the world as it currently is, because it makes sense to them in that current position. And if you start poking holes, well, then the ground that they're walking on, instead of it being, in their mind and in their perception, it's all solid and there's no danger, there's no holes. Well, that's that. When you start poking holes and saying hard truths in this confrontation, you're making holes in that pathway that they walk in life, in that construct of reality. And now things are dangerous, because they could fall into that hole. And that hole, this is what I've talked about many years ago, is that void, that abyss, that darkness. And that's what is ultimately being feared, is because that things make sense to them as they view it. And that's what part of the awakening is people start to realize, like, something's not making sense. They have this itching in the back of their mind that, like, things aren't making sense about the world or something. And then they can take it a step further and start asking questions, in that trivium process, being curious and doubting things and asking questions, then going to try to find the answers themselves. And this is how I've related in that earlier work I keep referring to, is that when you ask a question, it's because you don't have an answer. And the fact that you don't have an answer, well, that means there's a hole, there's that gap, there's that void, there's a darkness in your understanding of reality. And to recognize that means you have to recognize and be comfortable with that void, that gap, that abyss, that darkness. And people don't often like to do that, because then it makes them feel insecure. So tying it back to what we're talking about, well, people don't want to engage in that process, let alone of looking at the world in a way that they don't have an answer to things. And that again brings up this fear of owning personal responsibility in that tree of evil, because people don't want that personal responsibility to even go find the answer, because they just, well, is there even an answer? Am I even going to find an answer? It'll be a waste of my time, like we've been talking about. And they don't care enough to even try to find an answer, or they're stuck in solipsism of, like, oh, maybe there's an answer, but I'll never be able to figure it out. How am I going to even know if that's true? And they don't even try, so they just stay where they are, and they don't grow. They don't try to bring in new information, or try to which can potentially, again, this is the whole potential of all that information coming in, is ultimately that responsibility of doing something with it. But first is how it's affecting you, and how it's going to reshape you as that alchemical phoenix, and destroying things and reconstructing yourself. And that's what I had to say about the confrontation aspect. It's very deep in the psychology of the avoidance to this.
Oof, yeah. You made me confront a memory of a threshold that it just felt like unsurmountable at times, and I don't know if anyone can relate out there. And this goes into shadow work, right? Dealing with my animus on the father side, and thinking about, as I was, learning about the Illuminati and all that stuff that's naughty, right? For whatever reasons, I was not able to convince him of, like, anything that I, shared his way and all that stuff. And I was thinking to myself, like, I was still making my music mixes, but for me to, like, have my rhetoric and stuff, it just wasn't hitting with him and stuff. So I'm thinking, like, if I can't break through to him, like who can I break it through to sometimes and stuff? And it was more to it than that. It's like, trying to wield that King of Swords in a sense, confronting that father figure also, and also doing your own inner work and trying to become your own father and also your own mother in a sense when you're just maturing, growing up, right? And then finally realizing like, oh yeah, wait a minute. There's certain things that I've been learning about that he hasn't, or he learned otherwise, and it's false. And so you do the alchemical process, right? You have to burn the falsehoods to ash, no matter who or what it is, right? And it's nothing personal. It's just looking to be aligned to objective truth and burning away and washing away all the falsehoods, all the ash that gets easily burnt up because it's not that true alchemical gold. That's what we're looking for. That's why we burn the things away. And so when you have that, alchemical gold in the seed of your soul, in regards to the philosopher's stone, and I have like literally like my follicle spirals literally like in my chest. It's like a fucking phoenix, like straight up looking at myself in the mirror on so many occasions, especially, being divorced and that kind of stuff. And like just having that reminder all the time, like you got to get through this, man. Like it's temporary and whatever the hell. So yeah, there's the fear of the unknown, fear of what's my life going to be if I put myself out there. I was thinking, what if I put myself out there when I was married? Like who's going to attack me and attack my wife? And so there's all these things that run through people's minds that could be kind of stumbling blocks and kind of like over analyzing and falling into those fears of the unknown, I guess, right? And I'm going to share this tarot card because yesterday morning, I literally was in this position, maybe not the hands, but just like the legs, laying on my back, waking up kind of easy peasy, but then like thinking like, wait, I feel like I'm in like the hangman position, and like flipping the script on like your perspectives and tying it in relevance to what I've been speaking about and kind of what you guys have as well in regards to the great work, and also going through the shadow work and being more familiar with the unknown. It's understand that fear is the creativity killer, and that that was a quick aside, but it's rather that it's almost like a lot of people are afraid to take on a different worldview or perspective because they're so attached to what they've been conditioned to and what they've learned, and there's so much time investment and some life experiences that could have been based off of some falsehoods, and it is confrontational for them to confront that and deal with it, heal with it, or just it in general, and recognize and realize that that is not what makes them, and that we as humans are so much better than some of these things that we've been conditioned to due to so much propaganda, mind control, and the whole nine, right? So not to dabble on anymore, but I want to share in this one segment. Thank you. Hope that makes sense to anyone, but yeah.
Sarah brought up a good point about the confrontation. Yeah, humanity is like devolving to like a cowardly consciousness. Like, just laughing because I have like so many instances of like verification on this being an umpire. But the whole fear of confrontation, like Derek said, to confront like what does it mean to confront something, to be face to face with, to be standing, face to face with, So, someone who lacks personal self-love and self-respect, they're going to, run away from, her confrontation because if you don't want to confront yourself, and look at your own self and look at your own self in the mirror, how can you, go and confront somebody else? You know, how can you dive into the unknown? How can you come face to face, with the truth, and all of these things that we are talking about? So, this whole cowardly consciousness, as I just called it, is like Sarah said, like we've been conditioned to be that way. We really have, like with this whole spectator, just be the observer, because to really, to confront something, that's being in alignment, especially when it's, yourself, because you're diving into the unknown and you're saying, hey, I want to take a stand. So it's like you are aligning to, to a higher, a higher purpose, so that right there is going to empower you. And therefore you are going to be able to hopefully look in the mirror and come face to face with that which is, in front of you. And yeah, you may not like it, but it's the truth. And, the first thing that, Kris talked about was don't lie to yourself, stop lying to yourself. And you can never truly confront, yourself and, dive into the unknown if you stay in that lie. So yeah, the whole cowardly consciousness and, running away from, confrontation is a whole nother topic. But yeah, we've been conditioned to to react that way because it's just a reaction. And it's almost like a negative reaction because you're not doing anything, and therefore, problems just continue to, occur. If you don't confront, how the symptoms when you, start getting sick, they're not going to go away. So if we don't confront our problems, they never really are going to go away. Like it's just a simple law. Things just don't magically go away. Like you have to confront it. You have to face it. You have to, fight will with will. Or start will with will. So,
yeah, real quick, and I think we mentioned this in a previous segment, but like the reason we want to speak about certain things is because we do not want others to suffer that much just to come to that realization, have that catalyst, in like lose an eye or a leg in the process, type of thing. Like because yeah, like it's rough out there. You don't solve the issue when you're hurting a lot bad.
Yeah, and if I could just add on to that really quick on the topic of confrontation, all of that. Like I should have said this before, but to add it into it, it's not just the problem with being unable to confront either yourself or anything out in the external world. I think this is a social convention that's being designed purposefully and sewn in by the parasite class, but with it is being sewn the act of voyeurism, and voyeurism being made to be a normal thing where usually voyeurism is usually something that takes place in more of the, realms of the, behind closed doors, perverse type of adult activities. But voyeurism, how many times do we see or come across confrontations out into the world? We see it all the time, even at the grocery store, whatever it is. And instead of actually maybe stepping up and maybe defending somebody who's being assaulted or abused or whatever the case may be, people pull out their cell phones and record it and then upload it to things like TikTok. So to me, they're a connected problem. So that's just what I wanted to add on to the case for the problem with confrontation. I think there are other aspects of it too that are reeling us out, like what Brandon was saying, like this cowardly consciousness that's developing and building within the Earth human race, at least. So all things I think that should be dealt with first. Like we can't really expand as a human race if we can't even deal with some of these smaller issues. Like it kind of blocks us from doing any kind of evolving on the large scale. So that's just what I wanted to throw in there really quick.
I'll add on to that. It's related. Some related concepts people can look into are the bystander effect or groupthink, where like you say, people will just record it but won't do anything, and they'll wait for someone else. They'll think, oh, someone else is going to do something, and well, at least I can record it, and then the authorities can deal with it. Someone else can deal with it. Where that is certainly conditioned, and relates to the last episode of the Seinfeld, where the Good Samaritan law. The whole thing where they just mock and ridicule people who are being subjected to an immoral situation, who are being violated, their property rights are being violated. So people just find amusement. Now we've been so degraded in our consciousness and our higher potential that we just laugh at other people who are being, well, those who are in lower consciousness will laugh at other people who are being violated and in positions of immorality, and then the bystander groupthink or whatever effect comes in, where they just do nothing about it, and it's just, for them, they take it as an amusement, so it's a benefit for them because I guess apparently they're being entertained by the immorality happening to another one. As long as it's not them. If it was happening to them, then they wouldn't be as entertained as much. So this aspect of selflessness, not being selfless, but being the higher, truer, realer potential for ourselves to be in, that aspect of ourselves is lacking. So we lack that aspect of that higher potential within us that is there, waiting to be ignited by care and to fuel us into growing into that potential and remaking ourselves into that potential. But I would say some aspect of the avoidance of confrontation is basic psychology. Sure, it can be made, there's like a propensity to reinforce it, but it's also a basic aspect of our psychology where we seek pleasure and avoid pain. So those things are, the confrontation, as I mentioned before, it's like more of a painful thing. So we're going to try to avoid it, and it's natural. And one of the ways you overcome it, the positive way, is you care for truth. So then the confrontations, you learn certain confrontations are beneficial even if you're on the receiving end, and you're it's something I've talked about before. And in that Truth is Love article, I think it's in there, where there's like a quote where, your enemies will tell you things you don't want to hear about yourself. They'll be honest with you, but your friends will lie to you because they're just trying to get along, and they won't tell you things that you need to necessarily heal or grow. And so, welcome what your enemies will say, because there can be many aspects of truth within it that can be beneficial to you. And that's why the things that are more pleasurable or comfortable or feel more secure, they can be insidious because they can hold us back. And I've gone into the pleasure trap a lot in my former work. If anyone wants to finalize their thoughts, if anything they want to say, we'll wrap it up, and we can continue this. I think we can talk about it more at the next week, and then go on to another topic if we've exhausted it at that point. So anyone else want to say anything in closing? Final thoughts?
Yeah, please. First and foremost, Kris, thank you so much again for putting this on and having it available and all that good shit. Great shit, rather. Sorry, excuse me. And what you were talking about, yeah, I wrote down just a second ago, growing pains. Like we've all been there. You can apply it to so many different things, and just taking on a new job, it's like that learning curve, this and that. Like you're doing videos, you never done it before. You have to learn about it somehow. You have to have experience and gain something from it. There might be some pain going through it and some humiliating things going on with it. We've all been there, like it's kind of low stakes when you really think about it. And looking back, I just laugh. And that's just been my kind of like therapeutical means of operating in this life, in a sense of just like, yeah, just I laugh knowing how much I've been able to overcome things. It's not been an easy journey for me, but yeah, at the same time, and it's not, I'm not like laughing at myself or whatever the hell. It's like that humble laugh and just being in the moment type of laughter, that kind of like the happy Buddha laugh sometimes or whatever, right? And the alchemical aspects of laughter, I find as well. Just, you have haters that are going to come at you. It comes with the territory. They're going to act like they know you better than you know yourself. And they never even met you in real life. So it's really laughable, right? But others can get easily offended and triggered by that. So that's just one means of doing it, and getting in the heat of the moment and stuff. Kris, like you mentioned, yeah, with the heart rate and stuff, and like the temperatures rising and stuff. Yeah, it's getting heated, right? Breathe it out. Just do little, I don't even like to say breath work because it's kind of like a watered down term sometimes, but just take at least 3 big inhale exhales. It can work wonders, especially in like, yeah, like even when you get like the what do you call it, if you're gonna go on camera and stuff, you get the butterflies or whatever, like getting antsy and all this stuff. Like I got the giggles. I gotta like get that shit out of my, there's shit that people need to get out of their system for sure sometimes. So try to work some kind of method that makes it happen. So we have to experiment, trial and error and all these things, and take your time to not just jump the gun. I know there's a lot of young bucks out there. They latched on to some great knowledge, and hey, hats off to you guys. I wish I knew about these things when I was your age. Yet understand that there's a lot of life experience that can be applied to these things as well. It's not just reading a book and all of a sudden it's like you're a parrot. You're just like copy paste and that kind of stuff, and then you're not really experienced with interacting with people and dealing with the melee of negative comments and that kind of stuff. I've seen people fold and get bitter quite quickly about these things. So please try to understand the terrain of these things, and yeah, stick with the terrain theory, not the germ theory. Also, that's all I got to say. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone.
You can go, Sara.
I would just end it. I'd like to give some kind of spark of hope there, because some of this sounds very like there's not too much hope, but I tend to disagree with this. I do think there is still quite a bit of hope. And I'm going to quote from Ernest Holmes, who I'm personally a big fan of Ernest Holmes' work, and from his book, The Science of Mind, which is a really just a great book. I love how he puts this information together in his kind of language. But he comes out and he says in his book, like that people are only able to people are only able to be, well, he says it like people are only, excuse me, people are only able to perceive as much as they're able to, perceive, to take in. And with it, he says that even though all these people are at the same or they're all at different levels, and they're all perceiving in different filters, I would call them, the light that they see is always the same light. And I really think that that is like a beautiful thing to say, a beautiful thing that he wrote in there, that everybody is at their different levels with their progress, with their development, in whatever stage they're at. And as long as they keep moving forward, this is a healthy thing, because it shows it'll make sure, it'll ensure that you don't remain stagnant, which is what can lead to things like disease. But the fact that these people are all at different levels, I don't think is as important to understand that all these people are seeing different levels of the same light. And I think that that is, something that should be considered as like hopeful for whatever future might be in store for us, that it's always the same light, regardless of where we are all individually. So I wanted to share that, because I think that maybe that would be beneficial and give people more of a hopeful thing, that like even among all of the corrupted and negative stuff that is going on today, which can be very overwhelming and very difficult to deal with and process, that is still the case regardless. So I'll just end with that. I think that's a good way to end that.
Thank you for that. I've never seen an episode of Seinfeld. I've never seen an episode of Seinfeld.
It's okay. You're not missing much. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, that's what that's what Jim told me in the it was either Jim or Kris told me in the One Great Word Awards when I told them that. But if something is proper, if something is fitting, then it's correct. And I always say that morality, how natural law, how the law of freedom, all of these topics that we are talking about, is that missing piece of knowledge that humanity, lacks. And it is that piece that needs to be brought into, into the mix, into, humanity's consciousness, in order for us to get to our most optimal state. Because, we have the ability to, use formula, to look at, man's behaviors. Then therefore we can come to know what is the most optimal state, what is the most fitting, what is the most proper state, in order for us all to thrive. And that can be known. And not only can it be known, it can be done, it can be achieved. But in order for us to get, to that, we have to understand, a natural law. We have to understand, what is right, what we do not have a right, to do, what property is, what we do not have a right to take, what the law of freedom is, and have that definitive knowledge. So, I'm going to always, close out on the same, the same thing is, we have to come to know what objective morality is, and know that cause and effect is real. It does exist, and we can never escape causality. So thank you, Kris, for joining. Thank you, Derek and Sara. It's always a pleasure, being able to share, these kinds of events, with you. And thanks for joining us.
Yeah, optimized survivability. And the best way to optimize it is by everyone learning and accepting the definitive knowledge of the objective difference between right and wrong. If you don't do that, well, then you're not going to be optimally surviving with other people and cooperating and co-creating together.
And then you can't give a head nod to Leslie Powers with, optimal thriving, right?
Yeah, well, that's same concept. Yeah, to thrive. Yeah. And we had one question here. Don't you guys think there are people who are just too dumb to grasp abstract concepts? Yeah, it can be, but we're not talking necessarily to them. We're talking to anyone who comes across it, and maybe people won't understand it, and then they'll move on. And some people will come across it, and they will understand it, and they'll be interested in it. It's not like we're going out and talking to someone who doesn't understand it, and then we're going to keep hammering on them to understand it. If you want to do that in your personal life, go ahead. I don't think it's too productive, but you can plant a seed, and maybe they'll get it at some later point in their life.
If you don't mind me answering real quick, just because, and that's why I love these roundtables, and that's why it's really cool. Europa Nationala, One Great Book Warriors, as Brandon mentioned, like getting different perspectives from different people. So it's not always all this abstract stuff. You're getting, a package of different perspectives, right? Word to the hangman, as I flashed earlier. But yeah, not to drag on, but I know we're trying to wrap it up. So yeah.
If anyone wants to add anything to that final question.
I would just add in that no, I don't think the majority of people, I don't think it's that they're too dumb to understand these concepts. I think it has something, I think mostly it's a fear-based response as to why they don't take in a lot of information, because it can be quite overwhelming for many. And I think that's a social conditioning problem. But then I have to refer back to Ernest Holmes, who is saying people are at their levels, and it's about seed planting. And I've experienced it in my life. People who absolutely, it's like a brick wall. You're talking to them, and it seems like they're too dense or just being obstinate, and they're not wanting to hear you. But I've had it in my life where they'll go away, and a year later they come back, and the seed that I planted grew. And I've experienced this, and I don't consider people to be a lost cause in that respect. I think that everybody can come to these conclusions. It's just we're all on different levels. So, that's how I would feel about that.
Yeah, and I'll just say that's only how they're conditioned. Yeah, they may not be able to, conceptualize these abstract concepts and then their condition, but a condition is not permanent. It's always, capable of changing. And that's, what always runs through my mind, no matter how frustrating, it is, no matter how much of I wish I was running up and, held against a brick wall. It seems to be more like a diamond wall. But, that's the one thing that's always in the back of my head is that's just, how the condition, and it's always capable of changing, how conditions are always capable of being changed. And that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So they responded, abstract thoughts, certain IQ. And that's what I was referring to. Like if someone, because imagine some people like a 70 IQ, they're not much of a thinker. Like they can learn, but right now, like Brandon, you're saying, they're not there right now. So, you're not going to, so I said, you're not going to necessarily want to invest a lot of your time because it's going to be kind of wasted in trying to explain things. They need to go through a whole process of learning more basic stuff before the higher abstract concepts, but you can still put it out there and they can come across it, and then other people can come across it and they're going to get it. So we're not targeting people who don't get things or trying to force it into them if they're not capable. But yeah, if there's people who have mental impairments, or they're, they have a lower IQ for some reason, and yeah, chips fall where they may, and there's things you can work on yourself and improve your own life. And we're just putting it out there for people who can value it and take it into themselves and work with it and integrate it into themselves. So, yeah, I'll thank you all for joining. Thanks, Derek. Thanks, Brendan. Thanks, Sara. And maybe see you guys next week. It'll be episode 5, same title, Barriers to Initiation, Facing the Mirror, Shadow Work, part 3. Do maybe go into apathy and care for truth a little more, and cowardice was brought up, so we could talk about the whole not a trifecta but quadrifecta, or a quaternity, the negative quaternity of apathy, ignorance, cowardice, and laziness, and hirama biff, that metaphor, and how that's part of the things that keeping people from as a barrier to initiations. We can touch upon that as well. So
in reference to the 3 ruffians and all that shit.
Yeah. So we can finish up on where we started this week with self-love and self-loathing, and how I mentioned there was apathy is involved in that, and care for truth. So we can talk a little bit more about that and introduce the next phase of my itinerary in our progression of barriers to initiation, shadow work, and facing the mirror. So thank you again, everyone. Appreciate you for coming by and giving your time and your thoughts and expressing yourselves and your point of views and information you have to provide. And see you around next week. And thanks, everyone, for tuning into the chat, asking your questions and your comments. Have a good evening.